Hi, Whitney. Thanks for being with me today.
I love any chance to talk to you, Steph. Thanks for having me.
Same. Um, will you start by introducing yourself and saying a little about, where you're standing, where you're coming from?
Yes. So my name's Whitney Moran. I'm the managing editor of Nimbus Publishing and Vagrant Press here in Jigbooktuk. Yeah, I've been here for fif- no 13 years. And yeah, we're a mid-sized independent women-owned publisher in the North End, and we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2 years. And this is actually the 20th anniversary of Vagrant Press, which is our adult fiction imprint.
20 years for a fiction imprint, 50 years for an independent women-owned
Yeah,
publishing company. These are not small numbers. This is an accomplishment to
it
be
is.
alive and stay relevant
Yeah.
as a publisher.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my very first week in this job seeing a headline that said the death of publishing, and it was because of the ebook, the e-reader was coming out. And I just remember thinking, God, I finally got here, and now publishing's gonna die. And then I realized there's always something telling us that our industry is irrelevant and that it's not going to last, and it does. And so you'll find a lot of really tenacious people in this industry, and I count myself among them, and I know you count yourself among them. And so we're no strangers to fighting against, challenges and overcoming them. And as a mid-sized independent publisher that's not beholden to like a board of people that don't even read books, we can make the decisions we need to make to stay viable. But this budget presents, to jump in, this budget presents some really misguided and cruel and just totally, I don't know, like ridiculous notions of what our role is and how much we actually contribute to the economy here. So yeah, so we're feeling a lot of feelings over here. That's why I have three Defend Nova Scotia Books pins on.
And we'll add a fourth if
Well,
necessary.
I do have one here somewhere under all the. Yep, I got another one. So that's for you, Steph.
Thanks. I'll pick that up from you later. Um, can you say a little bit, just to kind of set the table, like say a little bit about the work that Nimbus does, the kinds of books that Nimbus and Vagrant are publishing, like the range of that, the scope of that publishing program?
Yeah, and I know that like having attended the Afterwards Festival, and I know you're so good at setting the context and that like we're all in Mi'kma'ki here. Like when I say Nova Scotia, I'm talking about Mi'kma'ki, and I feel like that's been lost in so much of these discussions at the government level. It's like, I'm talking about publishing, but it's all connected. Like the disrespect that's been shown to Indigenous people and the lack of consultation and the fact that most of us are settlers here, like we're very conscious of that in the work that we do because we see our job is to share people's stories and share the cultures and the histories plural of this place. And that's really wrapped up in truth and reconciliation. And so a lot of that has to do with working with Indigenous peoples, and in this place it's mainly Mi'kmaq people, and working with them in a respectful and thoughtful way so that they're able to tell their stories in their way and have those stories illustrated by other Indigenous people. And I don't know, I just feel like that part of the conversation is so important, and it's not saying that that's the only thing that we do, but it's so integral because our role as a regional publisher is to help share the stories that might not be told on a larger scale. So, for example, books like Sem's Map by Rebecca Thomas. This book is all about the original place names, and teaching kids about, like the name that of this place isn't what it was originally called. And so, like, there's an educational piece, but also like we're a trade publisher, so we create books for everybody. So Nimbus will typically be known as the publisher whose books you'll see in basically like any gift shop you go into in most of Atlantic Canada. So like a big part of our market is the tourism market and the gift market, which is also being threatened with this budget. And so we kind of see our role as being like um, a repository for Atlantic Canadian stories and perspectives and making sure that those are available to the people of this place. and representative of as many stories and cultures and histories as possible. But we're also making books for people that come here and visit and spend their money here and want to come here because of these stories. And so we're also, when you look at it, we're also a big export, industry in terms of like, even on a smaller scale, of people coming to visit and taking our stories back with them. So I feel like we have a really integral role to play in terms of like the grand narrative of what Nova Scotia is, and what Mi'kma'ki is. And, like when I think about what a place is and like what Nova Scotia is, it's the land and it's the people. And I feel like this budget is exploiting both of those things. And that's, I think, the thing that hurts the most and feels like such a personal attack. And I've listened to your other episodes, and I know that this is kind of the common refrain that's coming up is like, it's everything that's sacred, I think your first guest said. And that's really how it feels. It hurts, because it feels like if we don't have the land and we don't have the stories, then what do we have? What is Nova Scotia, if we don't have those things? So I feel like, yeah, we have a lot of privilege. It's an honor to do this work. Um, and like the people who work here full time, like we can't do our jobs without the people writing the stories. And this budget is really scary because, it's operational funding that allows us to exist day to day. And it's publishing is already a very low margin enterprise. And there's often books that we'll do, we know we're not going to make money on, but they're necessary, and they need to exist. And so those are the books that are most at risk, of not existing anymore.
There's a lot that I want to talk about with you. But first, can you say like, how many books a year is Nimbus
Yeah.
publishing in
So
Vagrant?
we initially, when I started, we were doing about 30 books a year, and that was, when I took over this role. That was about 2014, I think. Then we had this big lobby, the Book Start Here movement, and that was to create, the Cultural Industries Fund, which gave, I think, $1.1 million to, creative industries. And so we, received money from that. And so we were asked to double our output as part of that, as an export kind of strategy. So we started doing about 50 books a year. And so because we were asked to do so many more books, we hired more people. It was a lot more work for everybody, but we were also hiring more freelancers and more freelance designers, editors, production people. And so we're kind of then when they clawed back that funding, when the PCs brought in this new Publishers Assistance Fund, which went from 1.1 to 700,000 just for publishers, it was actually less money. We had our own fund, but it was like we have less money now. So thanks, but no thanks. Anyway, so yeah, so we're still essentially doing that many books, but without as much funding because when you're in publishing, you're planning like 2 to 3 years ahead. And so you can't just cancel all of those projects. You have to be really mindful of the commitments you made, the money you've already spent. Because in publishing, there's a lot of upfront costs. And then the return, if you get a return on your investment, is a few years away. So yeah, we're still doing, it's down to about maybe closer to 40 books a year right now, but it's going to have to be lowered again because of this, sadly.
Yeah, this idea that there are so many upfront costs and that whatever revenue or profit you might recognize could be several years down the road. This is something that I think is really part of how most of us in the arts operate. And so
Mhm.
the idea, I sort of got very riled up a couple weeks ago when I was listening to CBC Radio and the Spin Busters panel, and Chris Lydon said that, the cuts to the arts don't really matter because artists will just sell more paintings, sell more
Mm.
records, sell more tickets to shows, and they have a way to make money and they'll be fine. So we don't have to worry too much about arts and culture. You and I both know that that's bananas for a variety of reasons.
And that's
And
always been the perspective, and
that
that's part of
has
the problem.
always been the perspective. And y- I mean, I know all about the the kind of the upfront part of the book business, because full disclosure, I am one of the freelance editors that is, has the benefit of working sometimes for Nimbus. I edit one, I think of it as like 1.5 books a year, I think is probably
Yeah.
what it averages out to. And it's work that I love doing. And I know that, a book that I'm working on for you right now with a writer is scheduled for publication in 2027, I think.
I think so.
And you first approached me about it in 2025. Like, I started writing or working on this book in 2025. The author started writing this book probably
Yep.
5 or 6 years earlier than that. And at
Mhm.
every stage along the process, which will take several years before the book is ready to come out and start selling copies and
Yes.
bringing in revenue, people have to be paid. I have to be paid. You have to be paid. The writer has to be paid. The designer will have to be paid. The copy editor has to be paid. The printer has to be
There's
paid.
no guarantee. You're hoping for readers. Like publishing is a very risky business. So I don't know how I found my way here, except that I love books. And so, it's also books are returnable. That's another thing people don't really talk about. You do all this work to get books out there, and it's one of those few commodities that, you sell your products to an account like a bookstore, and they have a certain period of time where they can return the books to you. So, when authors ask us how many of my books have sold, we have to say, well, we have to wait till a year has gone by and then we can tell you because those books aren't sold until they don't get returned. And so it makes it even riskier for us because we can't, count our sales until they're non-returnable. So it's like the odds are already stacked against us in publishing, and this really just feels like a kick them while they're down kind of thing. And what you brought up before, though, is the thing I keep coming back to, which is like when you're in the arts, there's this thought that like we're here because we want to be here and we'll find a way to do the work and to make the art and to get it to people with whatever scraps we're given. And it's a really dangerous and offensive and like I don't know, patronizing way to look at this really vital industry that brings in so much money. Like, I have some figures here
Lay them
for
on
you.
me.
So, as an industry, the publishing sector sells about $5 million a year. That's direct sales. So, like us selling to our accounts. And then those sales result in about another additional 10 million in retail sales. So that's those accounts selling the books. So, we make a profit, they make a profit, people get books. And that's on $700,000 that's distributed amongst over a dozen publishers. So, none of us are here because we aced math, but we can still figure out that the math isn't mathing here because we're giving out, we're bringing in so much more money than we're taking. It's such a great return on investment. And so to completely defund a program that's vital and that's working and that's bringing in money makes absolutely no sense to me, especially when the amount that you're taking away is such an insignificant amount in terms of the massive deficit, but it makes such a huge difference to small publishers. Like I read that one publisher, Moose House, is saying that they're going to have to close because they're so small that funding really made the difference between them being able to exist or not. So for us, it's not going to mean that we can't do books anymore, but it's going to mean we're going to have to do different types of books, fewer books. Our main concern is keeping our staff, but it's sort of like over time, if you're doing fewer books, how do you make a case for the staff? So it's, that's the big worry for us is sort of like we've had all this momentum and we've been growing, for so long and maintaining, through the pandemic when costs doubled and like freight went through the roof and all the supply chain issues. And it just feels like we were finally catching our breath after all of that. And then this just feels like it's so devastating after everything that we've been through and come through, and I think demonstrated our value. So it's really difficult, and yeah, we're just all kind of like trying to do whatever we can, attend all the rallies, speaking to you. Like our general manager was speaking at public bills today, but it's hard when you feel like the government isn't even listening or isn't even there physically.
Yeah, I mean, I would go beyond that's a feeling. Like, it's not a feeling that they're not listening.
No,
They're
it's the
not.
fact. Yeah,
It's a
it's yeah, like they aren't even asking questions at the public bills, they're just sitting there being talked at. And so we'll talk and we're not going anywhere. I think we've been underestimated for too long, and undervalued.
yeah. You also connect into these questions or these issues through some other avenues. You're also a published author,
Hmm.
and you are a member of the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia, and you sit on the board of the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia. You've published a book for kids. You published a nonfiction book for adults. Um, I know that you're working on your own additional creative projects, long form
Hmm.
creative writing. I always hesitate to call it a novel until the person who's writing it says
Yeah,
that. But I know what you're up to.
yeah.
And so I just wonder too, as an individual, like as an artist, what is going through your mind right now?
Yeah, a lot of the same feelings. It's just sort of like, um, it's like telling a whole, I think a lot about the kids because I also am a WITS, like Writers in the Schools participant. And this is where I'm probably going to get emotional. Um, but like when you go into these classrooms where the kids barely have any, they barely have art supplies. Their books are the same books that were there when I was in school. Like, God, the teachers do what they can. A lot of them spend their own money on supplies. But like when you go into that classroom as a visiting author and kids tell you that they're writing books and they want to show you their book, and it's like someone understands them and you can look at them and say, I used to do that when I was your age. And look, now I get to make books and it's my job. And look at this author, Sherry Fitch. I used to read her books and now I get to edit her books. And the teachers are like, whoa. um, but for kids not to have that, I just worry about all these generations coming behind us, like telling all these kids that the arts aren't a viable career, that the arts aren't important, that they're not, the government doesn't think they're worth investing in. Um, that's the hardest pill to swallow for me because I feel like I've been around long enough that I'm confident and I know the value of art and I know that's not going to change. And in fact, I think we all feel it more than ever. And the solidarity has, amongst communities has just been the most uplifting thing. Um, but I worry about those kids who are already growing up in a rural have-not province, and the arts are one of our most vital sectors here and the thing that we're known for. And I mean, this is like what everyone says, right? Like this is why people come here. This is why people stay, or come back. And so I worry about that. And as I mean, honestly, I haven't really thought a lot about what it means to myself as an artist, but because I'm so entrenched in the publishing community at large and the Writers Federation, I'm just mostly thinking about what it means to us as a whole. But I know that there's probably a lot of individuals who are working toward getting published, who are trying to make it in the arts, and this is probably just such a blow to them. Like I can see a lot of people leaving. Um, it's really sad when you think about what happened with the film tax credit. It's like that, but every industry. And so it's hard to imagine what the impact is going to be, but it already feels like an erasure of all this, everything that we've built over decades.
Yeah, yeah, I was watching Public Bills yesterday. That's my new favorite television show.
Yeah, it's the hottest show on TV. Move
I
over, Michael
watch
Reed.
I watch about 8 hours of it a day for more than Heated Rivalry. It has
Yeah,
finally
it's
eclipsed Heated
juicy.
Rivalry as my
Yeah.
show of choice, I must say. And one of the PC MLAs did ask some questions in
Mm,
the afternoon, MLA Wong, and he seemed to particularly be asking questions of people who were there talking about arts and culture.
mm,
And he really like was going pretty hard on the idea that this government has invested more in the arts, except the way he phrased it was, we gave you
mm.
this amount of money.
Handout. Yeah,
And that has been sticking in my craw for about 24 hours now,
yeah.
because it is true that the money flows through the government, but it
Hmm.
flows from Nova Scotians to the
Yeah,
government, who is then supposed to redistribute it.
yeah.
Um,
In a way that one would think benefits Nova Scotians.
That's right. And into these programs that did not get built because the government wanted them to be built. They got built because the people wanted them to get built. And I'm thinking in particular of artists in the schools. The
Mm-hmm.
WITS program that you've participated in, writers in the schools,
Yeah,
paints, which is the professional artists in the schools, so it's visual artists, and perform, which
yeah,
is theater artists and dance artists and choral artists,
yeah.
who all go into schools all across this province. Every school child in this province interacts with artists in the
Yeah. I
schools.
still remember the people that came to my elementary school.
You do?
I remember Mermaid Theater coming. You know, those are the things you don't remember geography class. You don't, you know, sorry, teachers. I do remember one teacher reading The Hobbit all the way through, doing all the voices.
Amazing.
But other than that, it's those artists that visited the school that like something stays with you and tells you like that can be you someday. And like, I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's like we all remember that, you know?
Yeah. I think that the idea that we're dependent on the on government largesse, that they're giving us something, when in fact it's us.
Yeah.
That those programs came from outside government. They came from the work of people
Mm,
in arts communities who saw the potential to bring arts into the schools in that way, and this undoing of these things. I mean, Nimbus wasn't started by an act of the legislature.
no.
Nimbus's publishing program is not dependent on
No.
direction from the legislature. Everyone is out here working and building uh, things that the government can then invest in, that then return so much to Nova Scotians, both into the economy, which the government is obsessed with, but also, more importantly, into the kind of social fabric
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
of
And
our
for someone
lives.
so obsessed with healthcare and making that your platform, has anyone ever told the premier about the social determinants of health? You know, like all of the things that just aren't the hospital and the doctor and the nurse, which are all very important. But, you know, things like art and other programs that, like, you know, are preventative and that help people, you know, when they're in their day-to-day well-being. And I think none of us who are artists could say that art hasn't saved us at some point and doesn't save us again and again and again. And so I think people that don't fundamentally don't understand that, maybe they never will, but I think enough people are saying that it matters that they should at least listen. That's the very least they could do. Um, yeah, so I feel like you're right. It feels like Nova Scotians are being taken advantage of. We're being exploited. We're being patronized. We're being, you know, it's almost like the premier's treating us like the rest of the world, the rest of the country always has. Like we don't know anything, that we're, you know, we're not educated and we can't stand up for ourselves, and that, you know, it's just sort of like I said, we're used to being underdogs here, but like we can't work with nothing. You know, we can work with very little, but it's a message, you know, going saying we're not funding you at all anymore. We can't not take that personally. You know, it's saying that what you're doing isn't important to this province, and it's really easy to prove that that's incorrect in a lot of ways.
Yeah, a budget is a series of choices.
Mm,
I've, in the last year or 2 years, have become low key, high key obsessed with my own household budget and just
mhm.
attending to it in a way that I never have in my life. And it is brings me a lot of pleasure, actually, which is a very nerdy thing to admit
I love that.
here. But I'm keenly aware that every choice that I make with my money means a kind of an opposite, like a thing I'm
Yes,
not going to choose,
it's an
because
impact.
and that's also happening in this provincial budget. And so I'm kind of struck by the ways they've left revenue on the table, right? They brought the HST down by 1%, they removed the bridge tolls, and then
Mhm.
the ways they're trying to derive some revenue by increasing the taxes of people who own woodlands and choose not to harvest them, but to enter them into conservation, or
Good for you.
the tax on EV and hybrid
Yeah.
vehicle owners,
Mhm.
those kinds of things, alongside $1 million for some billionaires to sail their boats in our harbor.
It feels like this is why it feels dystopian to me because none of this makes sense. None of this is what anyone wants. It's what maybe a few people that the premier seems to care about want. They could fund those things themselves if they want them so badly, but it's not going to make a difference to the average Nova Scotian. I remember when they made that performative gesture. Well, I guess it wasn't performative because it was real, but with the GST or the HST is just sort of like nobody asked for that. 1% is not going to make a difference. What is this going to mean? Same with the tolls. At least leave the infrastructure up. But like, what a metaphor. We're tearing down the infrastructure. It's gone. Even if we decide this was a terrible idea, which it was, we don't have it anymore, and now it's costing jobs. It's costing us money to tear it down. The tolls were just an annoyance that we all were used to. And when we look at what we're losing, I'm sure we'd all rather. So I have this idea that every time we cross the bridge, we should donate money to an arts organization.
I love it.
$5 every time the toll has gone up. But it's idiotic. It really is. And I remember when that happened thinking, what is this going to mean? What are we losing? And it just feels like it is just like, how dumb do you think we are, that we're just going to cheer about this and like, this is your legacy, like you got rid of the bridge tolls. So yeah, it's just, yeah, it's not surprising that it's having an impact, but the fact that the arts and culture and heritage industries are being so directly targeted is very surprising to me.
Yeah, what does that say to you? What do you make of it?
It says to me that there's a disregard for the importance and, like I said, like how much money we actually bring in. I think arts are always considered discretionary to certain types of people, like this government. Progressive conservatives historically aren't. It's the liberals that are usually giving out the money, right? That's kind of um, the stereotype. But the fact that they just had the Nova Scotia Loyal program right before this, it just feels completely at odds. It's like the same thing as taking a photo with people who work at the airport tourism bureau a week before it shuts down. So yeah, I don't know. It says to me that like what you're doing doesn't matter. It's not valuable. Nova Scotia doesn't need you. It makes me question what he thinks people come here for, what he thinks is valuable. And now we know it's our natural resources. And so all of that feels like it's nauseating to me, because most of what we have is just the beauty of this place, and the stories that we tell about it. I feel like at the end of the day, that's what we have. And so to me, it just says that he fundamentally doesn't understand the importance of the arts, why they're necessary, and how intrinsically valuable they are to the economy. If economy is going to be your argument, then you can't even make that argument. So what is it that you're so intimidated by? It's clear that they don't understand the importance of the arts or how many people it touches and how interconnected we all are, all these industries. So, yeah.
That interconnection is something I'm pretty obsessed with in these
Mm-hmm.
conversations,
Yeah.
the ways that all of these different programs and services support Nova Scotians in
Mm-hmm.
ways that might be evident to many folks, but might also be not evident until they're gone,
Yeah.
until
And
that.
like, you think about a single book, like here's an example, Pantry and Palette by Simon Thibault. This is Acadian foodways. This is history, but it's also, we had to hire a photographer, there had to be an editor, there had to be a designer, printer in Canada. And, like, this book sold all across North America. And so like Acadian stories are being shared, in the States. And, now we have distribution in the UK. So that's one thing I should mention is that we received a grant, Nimbus received a grant recently to travel to the UK from the federal government, from the Canadian Trade Commissioner, and NRC. We beat out, it was like any industry that does export could apply. There was an increase in over 300% in applicants. And our national publicist, Karen McMullen, succeeded in getting us this grant. And so it's basically saying, we believe in the export value of Nova Scotia books, and we're going to bring you to the UK. You're going to speak at Canada House. You're going to attend the London Book Fair because we see the value export wise to the Canadian culture, to the Canadian economy. And so it was very weird timing because as we were getting ready to go, we were finding out about all this, going to the protests and writing letters. And then we show up there and I've got my pins on and I'm meeting with publishers from other places in the world. And when I would tell them what was going on, they actually didn't understand. Like, it wasn't even that they were just, oh, that's terrible. They were like, you need to explain this to me. Your government isn't supporting the arts anymore. Like, they're not supporting publishing because we're already underfunded here. That's the main thing is like Nova Scotia receives, I think it's the third lowest arts funding in the country. And when you look at per capita how much art we create and how much amazing art we create, it's really shameful. But in other parts of the world, there's so much more money for the arts, and so people don't understand. Like they're not even helping you exist. It's like these other countries, they have translation grants, they'll fly their authors to another country to support the books in translation. Like we don't have anything like that. It's just that we want enough money to survive, to be able to accessibly make books available to Nova Scotians. We can't compete with multinationals printing 100,000 copies and their unit costs are like $1 a book. That's just not going to happen. We don't have that market. So we can't sell our books for twice the price. No one's going to buy them. And so we need that funding to help us make our books available. And, and it's not just books for Nova Scotians. Like one of our books, Milktooth, it's on the
Mm.
Carol Shields long list. We just found this out the first day we were at the fair. And so I was able to tell the Scottish publishers and, the Irish publishers and the people I met with, like this book, is published by us and it's up against books from big publishers. And Jamie has gone on record as saying that if it wasn't for us, this book wouldn't exist. And like I believe in Jamie and I believe she would have found a home eventually, but I really appreciate her saying that because we do the books we believe in. And the fact that this is getting that kind of recognition is really astounding because it's the biggest prize for a woman or non-binary writer in North America. Um, so it's nice to have little moments like that, but it also feels like it's completely at odds with what we're hearing. Uh,
Oh,
so it's kind of like I don't know what other proof to offer.
there's a lot I want to say in response to that. So the literary festival that I co-founded and that I'm co-executive director of afterwards, one of our the key tenets of how we operate is that we keep our ticket prices
Yeah.
really low. And that's by design,
Mhm.
it's $10 or $15 to come to one of our shows, or it could be free. A lot of our shows are free and we make
Yeah.
tons of equity tickets available, no questions asked for anybody who can't pay the 10 or $15 to come in. I think our biggest ticket is our brunch, and that ticket is about $40, and that's because you get brunch. So most of the ticket pays for the food and the
Mhm.
service. Um, and recently I asked my festival partner, Ryan Turner, who does the spreadsheets and the math in our
Yeah.
organization. I do the talking, he does the math. Um, if we didn't have government funding, how
Mm,
much would we have to charge for tickets? Like if
mm,
the way that we presented our festival, if the way we were able to make our festival was just through ticket sales revenue, how much would we have to charge, assuming that we sell 5,000 tickets a year
yep.
across all our productions? And he said our $10 tickets would have to be $150 and our $15 tickets would have to be $225.
Wow.
And no one is going to come to Cafe Lara to hear five writers read on a Wednesday night
No,
for a $150 ticket.
no.
There is no one in our community who is able to pay that.
Yeah. It's sort of like there's people out there who think of the arts as elitist, and I feel like they're the only people that are kind of like countering or that are agreeing with the government stance. But it's like you're going to make it elitist
Yeah.
if this happens because, like you said, no one's going to be able to afford it. It's going to be a luxury, and it shouldn't be. And that's one of the things I admire most about what Afterwards does is it's the accessibility and it's the welcoming and just making sure the people that should be able to be there can be there. And I feel like it's the same with books. Like we already price our books lower than a lot of the multinationals do. Just because we know that the average amount of money that people are going to have in Nova Scotia is going to be lower. And we want to, we want people to be able to buy and enjoy our books. And the prices have gone up substantially since the pandemic. And we've had to swallow a lot of that. And it's just kind of like, it's hard to compete already. So yeah, it's real. The whole thing's really misguided, and I feel like it's important for people to hear numbers like that because we can't take for granted that like that those things are going to exist and continue to exist.
Yeah,
Just because we've always had them. There's a reason we've had them.
that's right. And thinking about the investment that the federal government made in sending Nimbus to the UK, I'm thinking about a conversation that I was part of last fall. My organization is part of a national group called the Canadian Association of Literary Festivals, and we had um, our conference last fall in Ottawa, and we had the opportunity to go to the Governor General's residence and have lunch. And we were invited to have a conversation there about quote unquote elbows up
Mm,
and about the opportunity in elbows up and the intersection between that opportunity and what literary festivals are doing. And I would argue that publishers, especially publishers like Nimbus, are also already doing this work, which is the work of creating in some cases and making legible in all cases uh, a national narrative, not a
mm,
nationalistic narrative, but a national narrative, right?
mm-hmm. Yep.
Making a container for Canadian stories, the stories that we tell ourselves and each other about who and how we are in the variety of ways that we are. Um, in this kind of intrinsic, necessary, yeah, work of social cohesion, of belonging and inclusion, of curiosity and exploration and empathy and understanding, all the things that you and I know well stories do.
Yeah.
This is work that is already being done by publishers, by writers, by artists, by festivals, by
Mm,
every kind of arts presenter and promoter. We're all already engaged in this work that the government, especially the federal government, but I think also the provincial government. I mean, Tim Houston was out there all elbows up and making his inspirational video. This is work that governments need to do, especially in a time like this where our neighbor to the south is,
yeah.
it's
Redacted.
yeah, it's redacted exactly. It's just
Yeah.
like increasingly erratic and terrifying.
Yeah.
And this work of making legible a Canadian identity, a Nova Scotian identity, is really, really valuable work that artists have always been engaged in
Mm,
one way or another. So
yeah.
we are carrying the government's water on this.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because the whole elbows up thing is a response to the US and the threatening of our cultural sovereignty and our identity as a nation. And so it's sort of like you don't expect that same threat to come from the call for to come from within the house, like
Yeah. Yeah.
um, you don't expect your own government to kind of not recognize the importance of that. It's like telling local stories in a small province in a country where publishing largely happens in Toronto, in BC. We're already working against all of, competing against all of those other stories. And so why not recognize the value of what we've already been able to do um, at a time where it's being threatened more than ever. Like it's such an opportunity that's being missed. And so, yeah, I do feel like the arts really do feel like something that like the government is very quick to take credit for when it's convenient, but not willing to fund when it's necessary. And you can't have it both ways. Like we're not going to forget this. And like yeah, of course we're going to find our way. Some of us will. We're not the most vulnerable people in this budget, and I'm very conscious of that. But we are, we work with people from all of these other industries that are also affected. And so, it's, I think everyone has a personal story in regards to this budget and what it's going to mean to them. Um, and yeah, I feel like it's always hard, and I know you struggle with this too, the sort of anything that's like nationalistic or, like what is a Canadian, what is a Nova Scotian, but at the very end of the day, you know, our stories do matter. And if we're not going to publish them, then who will?
Is there anything else you want Nova Scotians to know or to be thinking about right now?
Hmm. Well, we're not going anywhere. I think that's important to say, just because I know a lot of our authors are worried. You know, we work with a lot of freelancers, and there's just this web of creatives. And I feel like we haven't been able to tell anything to anyone definitively because the budget hasn't been passed. Um, and so we're kind of living in this weird dystopian hellscape limbo right now. um, but I just want people to know, I mean, I feel like anyone who's already listening to this, probably I wouldn't be able to tell them anything they don't already know, but just know that like we're standing in solidarity with all of you, and that we're going to be here to help share the stories of Nova Scotians, the stories of Mi'kmaq for as long as you'll have us. And you know, we're just going to keep working hard. We're no strangers to that. Like I said, we can work with very little, but you know, anything you can do to help the government understand how devastating this defunding of publishing is going to be, would be really helpful.
Such an incredible pleasure always to talk with you, Whitney. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for doing this stuff. Like I'm so grateful to have you, you know, having these conversations, and really honored to be asked to be one of those people to talk to you. So thank you.